an analyst is actually seeking out the truth of capabilities,
Yeah.
and that's why they are so prominent with buyers, and why, frankly, also why they know so much about the buyer side of the business. Because if you're a buyer and you inquire with an analyst, you have to tell them your actual scenario.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. Welcome to today's show. And this segment is for the podcast interviews in which we bring incredible guests from the community. And for today, we have one of the guests from the analyst community. So I'll let him introduce himself. Chris, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself and tell us, what you're focusing on these days.
Yeah, sure. More than happy to. Thanks for having me. My name's Chris Holscher. I'm an expert on industry analyst relations management, and I specialize in helping startups and scale-ups to succeed on this rarely seen part of the B2B tech playing field.
Okay, amazing. So once again, thank you so much for being here. And if you're in the audience joining for the first time, make sure you guys post your questions, comments. We are a big fan of this three-way conversation. So we would like to incorporate your comments as part of the show. Also, we have several episodes lined up, in the future. So stay tuned on my wall. Generally, that's where they are announced. So Chris, going back to the whole analyst relations term, and I don't know, at least in my community, to be completely honest, and this is very well skewed towards, the CFOs, the CEOs, the CIOs, CEOs, primarily from the end user community. And these guys might not even understand what end user means because these terms are very enterprise software world focused. The way enterprise software world likes to view things. In fact, the whole analyst thing, yes, sure, you are going to find analyst relations in maybe semiconductor, maybe in telecom. I think that's what we were discussing. But the whole analyst relations function is very limited in general in their view. So they don't necessarily understand what analyst relations do, what analysts do. So do you want to provide some insights in terms of what these guys are and why these guys need to know?
All right. Yes. Let's connect this to a scenario that people tend to know. People, if you put yourself in the shoes of a technology and services vendor in the B2B tech space, you probably know about branding is an activity, is a marketing activity.
Yeah.
So you're trying, and branding is what people say about you when you're not in the room.
Yeah.
Now, imagine you could speak or think of analyst relations as a branding expertise to an audience of one, which is the industry analyst that that we're looking at here, and I'll explain their role a little bit further down the road. But think of them as an audience of one, and you're marketing to them, or you're branding to them your company. Now, that one analyst has the impact into the market through their research, through their publications, through the inquiries that they get from buyers to influence an entire market.
Yeah.
So if you think of analyst relations management as a branding exercise for your vendor business, you can think of them as a multiplier into that market. And that multiplication factor is so strong because buyers are actively seeking the guidance, the advice, the data, the insights of these analysts to help them with their technology strategy or technology purchasing decisions, all the way through to concrete buying and implementation advice. So that is one way to look at an analyst that people can probably more relate to.
Yeah, so very interesting. So let's talk some more, there. Overall, I guess, I completely agree with you that if you are going to be a enterprise software company, and I don't know any enterprise software companies that have been very successful without the help of some analyst firms or the research firms, because that's where they are going to get the real brand recognition, name recognition. In fact, the analyst community, when any enterprise software community or vendors are going to be recognized by them, generally that's when they can sort of weed out the other startups and scale ups, and we are going to come back with these startups and scale ups as well, because they are going to feel that they are going to be slightly at a disadvantage. That's what, at least based on my conversations with them, that they obviously everybody wants to rank number one, I guess, with analysts, but they have their own sort of algorithm in terms of the way they do research, the way they rank, right? So sometimes that could come across as more of the disadvantage. So now going back to the enterprise players, because they are probably going to be at a very advantage because they are already established in the market, they are sort of proven. So what do you think of this? Maybe provide some insights in terms of enterprise versus startups, how they should be approaching, who benefits the most, enterprise versus startups.
All right. Yeah, that's a very complex question. To build on the previous one, we've described the role of one analyst. So basically, you can think of industry analysts as sitting between vendors and buyers, and also, by the way, also investors as a very important client base of theirs, and they're advising buyers on making technology and purchasing decisions, strategy decision, those kinds of things, or also sometimes advising investors on who's doing what in the market, where the trend's going, and so on. Because investors are very good in handling money, but they don't know anything about any technology, or at least not to the depth that would be useful. And they know that, and which is completely fine. Everyone has their specialization. Now, one way of looking at this is analysts are not there to promote your product. Analysts are basically, the role of the analyst exists to protect buyers from making the wrong decisions, or basically protecting them from what I call overly confident marketing from the vendor side. So really look beyond the marketing, look beyond the sales slides, and understand what's actually in it. What can they really do? What are their actual capabilities? What do we have proof for? What does the data tell us? What do the roadmaps show? And these things. So an analyst is actually seeking out the truth of capabilities, and that's why they are so prominent with buyers, and why, frankly, also why they know so much about the buyer side of the business. Because if you're a buyer and you inquire with an analyst, you have to tell them your actual scenario. You have to tell them, listen, we have these many people, we have these many end users, we have this kind of architecture. The solution needs to tie into these technologies. We need these interfaces, and also so they know really in-depth realities on the buy side. And because otherwise, any advice that they give the buyer would be useless if it was based on false assumptions. And since the buyer is paying the analyst for their advice, they need to be open and honest about their real scenario. So that gives the analyst an enormous depth and breadth of information about the buyer market. As a vendor, that is an incredibly valuable knowledge about the market. So as a vendor, if you tap into analyst relations, not only can you present yourself to those highly influential people in the market, specialists in the market, but also you can do your own inquiries with those analysts and ask them about, so what are buyers actually worrying about? What is driving their decisions currently? Where are things going? How have things changed in the last 3 months? How are people dealing with this new type of problem? How is this fitting with our roadmap, which we've just briefed you on? So as a vendor, you get very specific information back to your scenario, to your positioning, to your strategy, to your capabilities. Of course, always anonymized. That's clear. But it's absolutely an absolute accelerator for anything you do in a market. So that's the playing field that is going on. There are around 10,000 industry analysts in the world, so it's not that huge a number, a relatively small community.
Yeah.
Many of them have been in the business for like forever, like
Pretty well.
dozens of years. Others are young and very dynamic.
Yeah.
And analysts are always, because of their role, they're extremely interested, not in what the big guys are doing. That's
Yeah.
relatively table stakes. They will appear in reports, and that's their bread and butter
Yeah.
stuff. But what they're most interested in is, what are the actual innovators doing?
Yeah.
What are the companies doing that nobody has on the radar?
Yeah.
Because one question that they get from buyers all the time is,
Yeah.
who should, for this particular problem that we have,
Yeah.
who should we look at in the market beyond the usual suspects?
Yeah. Yeah.
Beyond the ones that we maybe even already had disappointing experiences with. We want
Yeah.
to know, who's emerging vendors, who are the cool ones, who can, leapfrog maybe the next generation and put us in an advantage situation. So that's why people inquire with analysts. Now, to answer your question, sorry for the long-winded start.
No. I mean, this is great.
But to answer your questions, between emerging vendors and the established vendors,
Yeah.
Analyst relations has quite a different value for both of those groups.
Yeah.
And let me talk from the perspective of the startup, of the emerging vendor, because that's what I entirely focus on. I in my career, I did analyst relations for more than 10 years with BT Global Services, so I know that part of the game. But at some point, I decided to switch sides and work exclusively for startups, because I felt that's where I can really add the most value to my clients.
Yeah.
And that is, if you want to break into a technology market as a startup, as a new venture, you really need all the help that you can get for that challenge. The market may be well distributed already, among all the big shots.
Yeah.
And yet you're making the decision. I have an idea. I think I can break into this market.
Yeah.
And change things, and maybe add a new vector, a new insight, a new way of solving things, and maybe even transform the entire game. But nobody is waiting for you.
Yeah.
Nobody even knows you.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is, you need to try and stand on the shoulders of ideally the most respected and the most sought after idea givers and explainers of your industry. And that's why you should reach out to industry analysts very, very early on, to make yourself visible and understood, and use them.
Yeah, so very interesting. So let's peel some more layers on the startup side of things, and I'll share my perspective in terms of what has been my experience, so far. So when you start any startup, obviously your perspective is going to be that, I'm starting with a very innovative, disruptive idea. Sure, there are going to be some disruptive, innovative ideas, but when you look at the analyst community, the role that they are playing is they want to streamline the category. And I like to compare this with, for example, let's say if you look at retail category, okay, you go to a retail store, and let's say if you want to buy cookies, okay, you get cookies in return. You don't get something else. But that's not how the enterprise software market works. Because when you ask for a cookie, you get something else in the enterprise. And that's very common. So in the retail world, and if you are launching a new product in the retail manufacturing world, okay, you have to talk to a procurement, merchandising, planning person, and you have to align your categories before you can place your products on the shelf. Otherwise, your startup is not going anywhere. Okay. Now the same analogy applies to this space as well. The only difference is that there are no categories. Okay. The only categories are defined by the analyst community. Now, some like them, some don't like them. Some don't like them because they're going to feel that,
and they're changing all the time.
Exactly. So the category alignment matters, regardless of whether you are talking about retail products or the enterprise software. Now, this is a misunderstanding between the buyers as well as the vendors. They just don't want to follow the categories. They just want to do whatever they want to do, and then and later.
That is so true. That is so true, Sam. I totally agree, and I think the whole concept of category creation, which is a very popular term, I think, well, on the one hand, yes, it is relevant and it's a good concept to think in. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because no buyer will make their decision because you have created a category or because you're leading in a category or anything. And I know so many companies who say they're a leader in the category that they've created, but if you look into it, it's almost like a category of one, and a category of one is nothing. It
Yep.
doesn't exist. So
Yeah.
what customers are ultimately looking for
Yeah.
is a solution to their problem.
Yeah.
If the category helps them to navigate the playing field in a more efficient way, great, all for it. And that's why we should align categories to what we do, and we should align ourselves to the existing categories and try to influence categories, maybe change them, evolve them towards what we believe will matter for client decisions in the future. Maybe at some point a category needs to be renamed, and that happened to me when I was with BT. I think we had like 3 years in a row where the category that our products and services were positioned in changed like 3 times in 3 years. Just because the market evolved so quickly, and new factors mattered more in how you would describe the thing, and that's fair. So it can be quite frustrating, but it is absolutely important to make yourself understood and to also to influence how the world is thinking about that part of the game, about that type of solution.
Yeah.
And you can do that through analyst relations very well. In fact, that's the only way really to do it, because those guys define the categories. And so you need to help them see the world through your eyes and convince them of what you're observing in the market, with all the the results that you see taking place, actually is useful to better explain this category, maybe rename it, maybe evolve it, and things like this. And if they think you have a point and you have data to prove it, and they hear that from other sources as well, so they can corroborate what you're saying, chances are things will move your way.
Yeah.
So that it's quite a challenge, and because very often you have to be able to explain your thing in both in technology terms, but also in business terms and everything in between.
Yeah.
And many technology firms really struggle with that a lot. And that's something where analyst relations can really excel.
Yeah, could not agree more. And again, I mean, the kind of approach that we have seen startups taking, and we get these inquiries on a daily basis. Okay, we have our own quadrants, and it's all over social media and everywhere, I guess. People call us, and they all are interested in, okay, how can we be number one? Okay, and that's a wrong question to ask, I guess. Because number one does not matter. We always say this. It should not matter even for buyers, and we are very upfront about that as well, that you should not be looking at number one and simply picking and buying. That's not how buying decisions should work. You should be reading fine prints of the report, because that is a model. We are trying to create a model, and we are trying to explain all of the variables that have gone in the analysis. So unless you analyze those variables carefully, then only you might be able to make decisions. But even then, you might require some sort of expert help to be able to understand how the model was constructed. Now,
I couldn't agree more. It's always think of the model or the quadrant or whatever, the wave or whatever kind of tool you want to use. It's just an instrument to get a better grip on what's happening in this market. It's just a lens through which to look at these vendors and their capabilities and what they do. Having some flexibility there and having the ability to not just look at the publication, but actually talk to the people who created it. Talk to the people who crunched the numbers and had those interviews with the vendors and looked into the demo accounts and what have you, looked into the references and had their discussions with the reference clients and all that. That will give you the unfiltered information that you need as a buyer to make your multi-million-dollar decision, effectively.
So very interesting. So when we talk about the vendors, right? So vendors are always interested in getting the higher rankings for whatever reason, because I don't know if this is some sort of sense of insult or whatever. I don't know what that is. Okay, they all want to brag that what, I'm number one, and that's what they want to communicate to the buyers as well. And buyers, honestly speaking, they don't like it because they
Yes.
don't care whether you are number one, number two, number three. They don't care. So
Amen.
now, and the other thing that these vendors struggle is that the whole ROI. Okay, one problem that I have seen in the analyst relations community, the analyst community, they all are struggling to justify the ROI for the analyst efforts because somebody has to pay the bills, right? So now, when you look at this more from the startup perspective, and they all are struggling to justify, okay, why do I need to engage with the analyst? What value do they bring? How that is going to result into some sort of commercial value for me, financial value for me. So now, let's say if you were advising a startup, how would you communicate this value to them that what they are going to get? And especially, I think their current problem and the investors' current problem is going to be that, okay, how am I going to hit my numbers? That's what they are worried about. And sometimes it could be a long road for the analyst efforts or the analyst investments to pay out for the vendors, right?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I'll there's so many facets to this.
Yeah.
So first of all, this is a very difficult topic because if you measure analyst relations and analyst value,
Yeah.
well, first of all, if you practice analyst relations in a good way,
Yeah.
you will get lots of different types of value from your interactions. There's not just going to be outbound value and communicative value into the market. There's
Yeah.
also going to be inbound value in many kinds of ways.
Yeah.
And it is extremely important to measure this from day one. Now, I know a ton of people who have huge problems in saying, so, but how do I measure this?
Yeah.
I think it's very easy, and we can go into that as well if you want to. Well, it's not easy. There is a clear way to do it.
Yeah.
You have to be. It's not easy, but there is a clear way to do it, and do it well. Now, the
Yeah.
problem with it is if you do it well and you really write down the value that you get from all those interactions and you make a bottom line, you can
Yeah.
quickly come up with very, very big numbers in
Yeah.
terms of what you've got out of these interactions and in terms of risk reduction, in terms of advocacy, in terms of making decisions quicker than your rivals, in terms of getting leads, in terms of so many things.
Yeah.
And you can end up with pretty large numbers pretty quickly if you do the things well. Now that I've seen companies, because the ROI was relatively big,
Yeah.
think, well, that can't be true. That is just out of whack.
Yeah.
And well, that can be a problem, but still you should do it, and you should, if that you end up with just the decision, yeah, it's an absolute no-brainer. I need to do this. I need to do this thoroughly, and then I don't really care,
Yeah.
about if the ROI number is 100% or 300% or 1,500%. I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one element to it. Now, how would I explain this to a startup?
Yeah.
With startup, it's extremely important to be aware of where they are in their journey.
Yeah.
So startups are evolving, or can be evolving very rapidly. Can be, what has been a 5 people company, and one day, 6 months down the road, can be 25 people and more, and suddenly with lots of investment at their hands or not, and things evolve very quickly. So it's extremely important to think of analyst relations in a very particular way when you consider startups. So it doesn't make sense to think of analyst relations for startups as a baby version of real analyst relations.
Yeah.
That's the complete wrong way of going about it. And that is one thing that I learned over the last 1.5 handful of years, specializing entirely in startups. You need to appreciate their particular world and how their strengths and weaknesses and what they struggle with and what they need solved. And tailor your analyst relations approach to that reality. And one way that I'm going about it is to say you should always start with what I would call, after you've qualified AR for yourself and qualified yourself for AR to make sure there's a fit, it's really something for you.
Yeah.
You should probably start with what I call a minimal viable analyst relations approach.
Yeah.
And that means no investment whatsoever in analyst subscriptions or tools or databases or what have you. You don't really need it for minimal viable analyst relations. The only thing that you really need is someone who understands analyst relations for startups, ideally,
Yeah.
and who can help you get on the right people's radars,
Yeah.
the right analysts that really matter in your field, and make yourself seen by those guys and make yourself understood by those guys and make yourself appreciated for the new vector that you're bringing into the field that they're researching. And that is more difficult than people think, because you cannot buy time on analysts' calendars. You need to win their interest.
Yeah.
And that is something that an analyst relations person can do really well. So that is the only thing that you really need. You need an AR savvy person to help you play this. And then the only thing that you do is you identify the right types of animals.
Yeah.
You create meaningful briefings for them.
Yeah.
You make sure that you get on their calendars, and AR people know how to do this.
Yeah.
And then you ideally, hopefully at the end of the briefing, you get a response from them that says something like, "That was really interesting.
Yeah.
I want to stay in touch. I want you to update me on that next step that you're doing," because that tells you you've earned your place on their mind, on their radar, basically. And that is a very deep, actually, a very meaningful product market fit validation, because it means that that analyst is willing to spend his time that is otherwise occupied by the SAPs and IBMs of this world, willing to spend his few hours with someone like you, and that is really powerful. Now, if you do this well, then, and if you repeat this, and if you continue briefing them on the most important developments in your space on a every couple of months or something, only if you have something meaningful to say, not just to be in touch again, but you have to have something meaningful to say. The typical value that you get out of just the minimal viable analyst relations approach is that you get risk reduction and analyst advocacy. And I know you know that I'm doing the state of startups with industry analyst research report with the University of Edinburgh, and on a biannual basis. And one thing that we have received as an indicator of where startups that practice analyst relations get the most value, even in the early stages, is in fact in risk reduction.
Yeah.
And that is pretty amazing, because if you're a startup, you know that there's a huge risk in you bringing some innovation into the market.
Yeah.
And then some big shot hijacks your topic.
Yeah.
And uses your language and your terminology and pretends to do the same thing and throws all their marketing at the buyers using your terminology. But in reality, they're not able to do your thing. They're just pretending, they're just using your words.
Yeah.
And that is really terrible for a startup, because you have no chance to break through. An analyst, if the analyst understands and appreciates your innovation, they will be your natural allies, because, as I said earlier, their role is to protect buyers from overly confident marketing and protect buyers from these pretenders. So they will protect your new innovative value proposition that you're capable of delivering from the big pretenders that just say they can do the same thing as you can. And that gets you a much better likelihood to get a place at the table when it comes to RFIs and vendor shortlisting for exactly what you do. So risk reduction is a huge value that you get even from minimal viable analyst relations without even investing in anything, because briefings are always free, and if you know how to do them well, you can get that value. So how do you measure this? Now, this is pretty much a make it or break it, live and die kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now, ask yourself, how much am I investing in this?
Yeah.
And what's the typical death rate of startups within the first 5 years?
Yeah.
Now there you have your value. One data point that we had through the analyst research, through the state of startups with industry analyst research, is that the typical death rate of startups within the first 4 years in business is around 50%.
Yep.
Depends on how you cut it, but that's a rule of thumb. Now, for startups that made it into high-profile analyst publications,
Yeah.
that 50% death rate suddenly changed into an 84% survive and thrive rate.
Yeah.
With many of them getting, lucratively acquired or having, follow-on investment and particular growth and things. So that is a real value that you can get and a means to calculate this. But that was only one little bit,
Yeah. So let's slice and dice this a little bit, okay? So I'm going to give you a new job today, okay? So
Right.
you are not going to be.
I don't want one.
You don't want one? No.
I don't want one.
Come on.
I'm very happy where I am. Okay, come on, bring it on.
New job for fun. Okay, you can have a little fun. You don't have to be always intense, Chris.
Sure.
Okay. So today you are going to be some sort of CMO of a startup. Okay.
Okay.
Your job is a CMO or maybe CEO. You are planning for the budget. So let's say, and we are going to design some sort of inflection points here for this. Okay. And inflection points, if you're not familiar with that term, these are going to be some sort of financial inflection points, maybe 500,000 funding, maybe $1 million in funding, maybe 100 million in funding or whatever. So these are different stages of the financial life cycle of a startup.
Yes.
Now, obviously, you as the sort of the AR champion, analyst, champion, you are going to argue that what, as a CMO, you need to have budget for this. This is really important. I get it. Okay, but let's say if you were designing the budget, okay, I'm the CMO here. Okay, I'm trying to design the budget. Obviously, if I'm talking to my investors, their priority is going to be, when are you hitting my number? That's what I care for. I don't care for anything else. When I'm paying you money, I want my return back as an investor, right? So now let's say I have paid you $500,000 in my investment. Now you are going to use that money somehow. You are going to hire some people. You are going to design the product. You are going to spend in marketing. You are going to spend in the analyst relations. So now let's talk about these inflection points and how you would design the AR budget, where that fits in the organizational structure when you are going to design $500,000 company. And this could be from the CMO perspective, or you were saying that the analyst relations is slightly broader, organizational function. I don't know where that would fit. My assumption is going to be that would report to a CMO, because this is very go-to-market strategy, marketing-centric function in my mind.
That is a very typical scenario. It's not the best scenario, but it's a very typical scenario.
Yeah. So talk about the different inflection point. Okay, when any startups should be introducing an AR function and how much you are going to allocate for AR. So talk about whatever inflection point that you want to pick. Okay, 500,000, maybe $1 million, maybe 100 million, maybe pick a couple and design your organizational structure, allocate your AR budget, and maybe convince me on the value, what you are going to get out of it.
All right. Okay. Cool. So, how old are we? When are we?
When are we? Meaning, like, how old is the startup? Is the question?
Yes.
So you can pick the age as well.
Okay. So we just started. We've been in the market for, let's say, half a year, a little longer. We had we've defined what's our minimal viable product. We have identified rough ideal customer profiles. We have a general idea. Maybe our founders have been in the game for, they're not rookies. They've been in the game for maybe 10 years, have worked at a larger company, have now started to do their own thing, that kind of typical scenario.
Yeah.
So because startups are not always run by, 20-somethings, it's quite often that you have someone in their 40s or 50s even, starting over again because they couldn't realize the innovation that they wanted to bring within the large company. So they thought, let's do our own thing. Okay. I would, in terms of analyst relations engagement, I would immediately start with at least the minimal viable analyst relations approach. No cost associated to it. I would just make sure that the AR that there is an AR savvy person in the team, either inside the company, which would be best, or you get a resource that can help you on a co-pilot kind of. In a co-pilot kind of way, not the technological co-pilot, but like an advisor. And I would use the first few months really to identify the right analysts that are most influential and useful in that space, and basically just start following them. start downloading free research that they publish and read it. And then start to prepare analyst introductory briefings with my specialist, and reach out to them in a way that gets me on their calendars. Now, if I get those introductory briefings and they go the way they are intended, and analyst says, yeah, tick in the box, love what you're doing, keep me updated, and not in a way like, oh, that was interesting, thanks for calling me, have a nice day, but really stay in touch. That indicates product market fit for me. And that would be the first inflection point where I would go to my managers and say, okay, we have this money, we have these 500K, we know that we have a product market fit, we have established the relations to the top 5 or top 10 voices in the market from a variety of firms. And it doesn't have to be just the large companies. It can be, specialists, it can be smaller generalists, it can be even individual analysts who maybe have worked for Forrester or IDC or Gartner for a long time and that now are doing their own thing, but they still have a very powerful voice and good connections in the market. So it could be quite a variety. So I want to use this money now and find out which of these firms actually offer me what I need most to do for my next priorities. And those priorities might vary quite greatly from depending on what type of firm you are and where you have your blind spots and where the problems really sit. So maybe you're a very technology focused company and you need to know something more about the industry that you want to sell to, or things like this, or the other way around. Could be as well the same. An interesting point there, by the way, is for technology heavy companies, they always think they know everything about their technology, which might be quite true. It never really totally is, but they may be very, very good at what they do. But then there's adjacent technologies around what you do that you need to connect into, and you maybe are not a full-blown expert in all those adjacent technologies and the other systems that you need to tap into. So also for tech-heavy startup, it might be good to have possibility to reach into experts that can help you with these surrounding things. All right. Depending on what my analysis then is, where I have my blank spots, I would then choose a startup program really of an analyst firm to help me with those specific problems. There are some very good startup tailored programs they do cost money. I have money at my hands, as I learned. And from what I've seen, most of them, if you make use of them in a good way, they're extremely effective in what they can do. It's like a gym membership, it doesn't just having the membership doesn't do anything. You have to go there in person and work out and do something. And your AR manager is basically your personal trainer, to help you make use of that gym. So I would select the right program for me, and those programs typically will set you back around something between 35,000 and maybe 50, 60,000, depending on which firm, depending on which format, depending on what you really need. But this is money very well spent. And for example, what you get for that is unlimited, unmetered access to the analyst firm's experts. You can talk to them. You can not only do briefings to them, but you can do inquiries about your market, the adjacent technologies, or particular buyer interests and all those. So I can get a whole lot of very specific, very tailored to my situation information into my decision-making centers. And that is both in my product management, as in my marketing, as in my sales, as in my operations, because I need to build a well-oiled machine as well. And I can even use it in my HR function, because if I go out to the market and say, we need to hire the best, sales, technology, whatever people, and I can tell them, by the way, we're working with this analyst firm, and as a member of our company, you'll get access to all those smart cookies there and get access to this research and this data, and you can lead those conversations. That's very, very attractive, and it helps attracting better talent and retaining them. So I can, depending on what I need most, I can design my program, and for that kind of money, I get this value back into my system. Now, that is something that I would do then for the next at least, well, basically, I would stick with that program indefinitely and maybe change it along the way as priorities change. But that is something that you should start doing then. The way how I run this program then, I'm a big fan of at least balancing, but in the early stages, probably even overly using inbound analyst relations rather than practicing outbound analyst relations. So inbound is getting inquiries, getting insights into my system, helping me to make bolder decisions faster. And that is, by the way, very attractive for my investors too, because the one thing that they hate is risk. So it helps me just sharpen my spear, sharpen my positioning, sharpen my messaging, sharpen my product development, also sharpen my PR, my external communication, and there are methodologies you can do that. You don't just send your PR to the analyst. That's the worst thing that you can do. That's just not cutting it. You can do a lot more interesting stuff with that, and it doesn't cost you even money. So I would start prioritizing inbound analyst relations. And once I get to a point that I see, okay, my positioning is really spot on now. My communications, my how I explain my differentiation is really sharp now. My ideal customer profiles are spot on. We're starting to get enormous traction there. We're doing the exact right thing in the way that we wanted it, and we get those. Maybe we even already got on an analyst report. Maybe they even put us in a publication also. That's the moment where I then say, okay, now let's shift the focus. Oh no, that's not ideal. Let's get to a more balanced inbound, outbound analyst relations where I also put more energy into outbound briefings and inform analysts about my continuous development and all these things. That's how I would get the most traction. And then comes this is probably the next inflection point. Where when I see that happening in the market, in my business, that's where I then can decide for more specific sales supportive and marketing supportive tools that I can bring into the business from the analyst side. So, for example, with some analysts, you can have something like a reprints program, where you can purchase report reprints, either reports in which you have been mentioned, or reports that describe the market, describe the trends, describe the innovation, discuss the problems and the solutions and those kind of things, and new technologies and developments, and maybe not even mention you, but support your way of understanding the field and understanding the trends. So if you can use those to underpin your communications to clients in a very trustworthy way, that links you to the brand value of that much bigger analyst firm and signals that you're playing ball with the big boys, and that's a very powerful thing. Now, such reprint programs, you can then link them, of course, to lead generation games, and those, the ROI on those is typically quite high. That's quite nice. So that would be the next inflection point, and from there on, it really depends on what you want to achieve, how much you want to actually invest into specific tools. If you want to add more, it depends on also which firm you're working with. There are some firms that give you a complete package, all you can eat. There are other firms that say, well, you can talk to all our technology analysts, and if you want to add the right to speak, also to inquire with our market analysts, like industry analysts, that's an extra, I don't know, couple of grand you need to invest. And if you want to speak to our functional analysts, the marketing guys, the finance guys, those kind of things, you can add another package. That's a very typical model as well. And it really depends on your play, what matters most to you. But those would be the main inflection points. So start with minimal viable. Once you've got proof of concept that your product market fit, that's the moment to say, well, now we know this makes sense. Let's invest in a minimal subscription once we have sorted our system, once we've sorted our startup, once we've sharpened our spear, and we're running a very good game, that's the moment when you can then start to go prioritize more outbound activities.
Yeah.
And start investing into those additional add-on products, if you will. So those would be the 3 phases.
Yeah, so very interesting. So one of the problems that I have seen, especially in the startup community, is that, and this is the notion that they have that, if I'm going for the analyst, I'm going to go for big 3, big 4. And generally, obviously, that's where their line share of the AR budget is going to go, I guess. If you are talking about AR budget, that, okay, in the first conversation, we have decided the AR budget. And now I'm looking at this strategy and I'm simply going to call members. And I'm going to, talk to these big 4. Now, the challenge with that approach, and I'll give you an example. For example, no analyst firm, like no, literally no, okay? Analyst firm can master every single product category as well as the industry in the market. That's not how this works, right? So everybody's going to have their own specialization. They are deep in something. They must have some sort of practitioner background in that specific craft to be able to understand and forecast that market. Otherwise, they are going to be way far off. Okay, I'll give you an example of one of the conversations that I had on LinkedIn. So obviously, we are very deep into supply chain centric industries, manufacturing, and one person came that, hey, we are launching a manufacturing. Can you help us? I'm like, sure, we do business in manufacturing, but we don't understand manufacturing. I'm sorry. Even though I'm talking manufacturing all day, but we don't necessarily understand because we don't get into the hardware game. So our specialization is very limited to the enterprise software categories of manufacturing. We don't do anything else. So it gets that deep. Now, when you talk to any analyst, AR people, they are willing to talk to anybody and everybody, I guess.
I think that is a super relevant point, and not just for startups, but for anyone. And I fully agree with what you say there. And my way of thinking about that is, and it doesn't have to be the right way, but my way of thinking is, the world out there is terribly complex.
Yeah.
Things are moving incredibly fast. Simon Sinek did this great book about the infinite game. So in game theory, you have there are rules of the game. You can win a game of chess because there are a known number of players. There are a known set of rules. Everybody's agreed to the rules, and they're playing by the rules. And at some point, the game is over, and one side win and the other lost.
Yeah.
Fine. Or well, there is a remis as well. Now, in our reality in the market, there's no really set of rules that everybody agreed to. In fact, most new entrants into the markets and even the existing players try to change the rules all the time, or break the rules, or define new set of rules, or invent new terminology and stuff. So they're changing the playing field. They're changing the rules. There are new players all the time. Other players merge or die or whatever. So business is not a finite game. It's an infinite game. So what you really need to succeed in this infinite game is you need to bring in as many of those different perspectives to help you get an interpretation of what's going on. So you really need to speak to people with different backgrounds, with different deep insights in one space, and they may have very good insight in that one space and a total misconception of something else. But it's relevant because they are influential, voices. So you need to, and that's where also it makes sense to speak with very different types of firms and different types of analysts and different backgrounds, and to help you create and form your own understanding, your own picture, because you cannot get to the truth. There is no truth. There's only interpretations, and that's why it's so important to have specialists, to have generalists, and to have everything in between, and to not limit yourself to just talk to the GFIs, to the gardeners, foresters, IDCs, but also talk to the specialist firms and to the outliers, to the rebels, if you will, and get that. And then you would need to understand. Of course, there's some analysts that have a very high influence score in the market, and you can measure that. There are tools to measure this, and that's one thing that an analyst relations expert can help with to understand how influential is that person in the market based on their activities and their publication and everything. But there's also what I call an impact factor. How impactful is that analyst to our decision making internally? how compatible, how valuable do we think is their particular insight to how we see the world, to how we, does it fill the gaps in our thinking? How helpful is that person for our decision making? So there's influence external and impact internal, and you'll have to balance that. And some analysts are better on the one side and others are better on the other side. Ideally, you want both combined in one magical person, which you never have. But that's why you need to work with analyst relations specialists who really concentrate on that field all the time and help you, speak to the right people about the right topics in the way that is productive for both sides, so you can really get something out of that.
Okay, amazing. So we are coming close to our time now. So we have one comment. We are going to address that before we wrap.
Oh, Carter.
Hey, Carter saying, hey, Carter, thanks for joining. So he's saying at Gartner, way back in the 90s, there were certain total of ownership numbers that we downplayed because they were so large. And I don't know if you're going to have any sort of comment there, Chris.
I think that's true. I mean, Carter is probably the man in the industry when it comes to understanding numbers of Gartner and Forrester and how they do in terms of how many people do they have, how influential are they. So really good to see him in the comment section here. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think to some extent we still do that sometimes. And depending on what people want to achieve. The analyst game, it's a very tight industry as well on their side. Gartner is I don't know how many 100-pound gorilla in the room. And then the Forresters, the IDCs are smaller. Forrester's been quite struggling a bit, although they're a fantastic company. They have fantastic analysts, fantastic tools. And it's quite difficult for some of the smaller players to position themselves well. Although I love to work with the smaller firms, I get tremendous value out of them. They have their way of differentiating through providing value, and it's to some extent I think it's not really that meaningful to discuss the weight of an analyst firm in total, because I need to break it down to the individual analyst and what influence that person has in the market. That is more important, I believe, than the weight of the firm in general. So one thing that I've seen is that smaller analyst firms, when people say, yeah, but they're not as influential as the big 500-pound gorilla is. Yeah, that's true. But that person, what that person analyzed, what they said, maybe totally makes sense, and people get it, and people say, yeah, that understanding has clicked a thing in my brain, and now I see the world through this lens.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter whether there is the Gartner brand on the back of that person's head or another brand.
Yeah.
So I try to get away from the company perspective and more to the individual person perspective, and that has worked beautifully.
Yeah, so very interesting. Thank you so much for that. So now I think we are really close right now. So any closing advice, and if people want to reach out to you for any advice or questions, how can they reach?
Well, the easiest way these days really is to go through LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest. That's where I run most of my interactions with people who are not clients or direct contacts. So that is the easiest. That's also where I publish most of my musings about the whole topic. And you can find not just the direct articles that I've written, but also the research that I'm doing with the university, of which we're just a few weeks away from closing the second round of the research. So if you're a startup, or if you're an investor or an accelerator or someone in the ecosystem of startups, look out for those. If you invest 10 minutes in answering our 2 handful of questions that we have, you'll get all the research results. You'll get the report. You'll get if you care to drop us your email, you'll get an exclusive invitation to a webinar where we explain all the findings and interpret it. And I promise we don't use that for any funnel activities. That's why we did it with the university, so to keep us away from using that as a marketing tool. So you'll only receive the invite to those sessions, and maybe an invite to participate next time when we do the next round and adding the next puzzle pieces in the next bit of research in 2 years' time or so. So yeah, to give you an idea, we're at round about now 800 participants in the first and second bits of research together. So that's quite a large body of data and information now. And I had a peek just the other day into how the results are coming in and how the people are answering our questions, and it's going to be really, really interesting. So this time we're focusing on the best use cases, because you've asked for that. We're asking for which analyst startups actually use, and what recommendations investors are giving. So when to do what at what stage. So a lot of what I've told you today is also grounded in the data that we're pulling in through our own research.
Yeah.
So if you want to get hold of that, the way to go is just contribute your 10 minutes, throw in your views. And it doesn't matter whether you have experience with analyst relations or not, because we want the entire 360 degrees of views to really interpret what's there.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much once again for your time. You are incredible. You are knowledgeable. You are very comprehensive, thorough. So thank you so much once again for your insights and time.
Thank you so much for having me.
On that note, guys, that's a wrap. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our interview series for which we meet every Friday between 8 to 11 a.m. Eastern, depending upon the time zone of the person we are interviewing. So stay tuned for more episodes, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.